I knew I was the outsider from the very first time I stepped into my husband's family home. No one said it outright, but the way they stared, the way their eyes skimmed right past me and then flicked back with a guarded politeness, was enough to make my heart pound. In the pit of my stomach I felt a cold dread that warned me I'd never truly belong. There was an atmosphere in that place, something unspoken, something toxic, like a light film of dust coating every surface, settling into every conversation, every holiday gathering, every fleeting smile. I was never invited in, not really, and the strangest part of all was that my husband, the one who had promised to love me, to shield me if need be, acted as if he couldn't see that I was slowly suffocating under his roof. My name is Harper. I'm 34 years old, born and raised in a small town in upstate New York, though I've spent the last 10 years in Philadelphia. I work as an accountant at a modest tech startup. My salary isn't enormous, but it's enough to cover rent and a handful of indulgences like the occasional weekend getaway or dinner at an upscale restaurant. I met Ethan, my husband, when we were both in grad school at a local university. We were in different programs. He studied finance. I was finishing up my accounting degree. But we bonded over shared late-night study sessions, cheap coffee, and the kind of giddy optimism that convinces you love can conquer anything. During those first 2 years together, I saw only the man who made me laugh, who left silly notes in my pockets, who told me how much he wanted to give me a stable, loving life. We married soon after. I was overwhelmed with a sense of hope. It felt like I'd won a rare prize, a warm, funny, reliable man. I never suspected that our biggest hurdle would be the family he came from. Ethan's family, the Garrisons, lived in a large, well-maintained house in an affluent Philadelphia suburb. His mother Seraphina was a sharp-witted, impeccably dressed woman in her early 60s. She was slender, with bright, calculating hazel eyes and short, elegantly styled gray hair. From the moment I met her, I felt the quiet sting of her judgment. We first shook hands on a spring afternoon, right after Ethan and I got engaged. "Nice to meet you, Harper," she said, giving me a thin-lipped smile, her fingers pressing a bit too firmly into my palm. "Ethan has told me so much about you." But her expression said otherwise, as if she were already lining me up against some internal yardstick to determine whether I measured up. Then there were his 2 older sisters, Lauren and Dana, each with a demanding career that Seraphina bragged about whenever there was an audience. "Lauren is the best corporate lawyer in the area," she'd say, or "Dana's interior design firm is known statewide." But the more I listened, the more I realized their pride was also a form of insulation against outsiders. They had formed a tight fortress around Seraphina's favor and approval. Anyone who tried to breach that fortress was bound to be kept at arm's length. For me, that distance felt like miles. At first, I tried to shake off the uneasy vibes, telling myself, they just need time to warm up. I can't expect them to love me from the get-go. So I played the patient daughter-in-law. I smiled politely, helped in the kitchen, asked them questions about their interests, gave out compliments whenever I could, brought thoughtful gifts to every gathering, birthdays, anniversaries, even random Sunday brunches. But none of it broke through their invisible but palpable barrier. I remained a polite guest, sometimes a tolerated presence, never family. In my first year of marriage, whenever Seraphina threw a dinner party and asked me to come, I'd show up with a homemade dessert I'd spent hours perfecting. I'd help her set up the table. I'd offer to wash the dishes afterward. But while I scrubbed and dried, she and her daughters would sit in the living room, sipping wine, laughing at inside jokes I knew nothing about. I would hear them say something about, "That trip we took to the coast," or, "Remember when Dad?" And then the squeals of laughter that followed, while I stood alone at the sink, meticulously wiping each plate clean in near silence. There was no invitation for me to join them, no gesture that said, "Harper, come sit, let me pour you a glass." Just a lonely, hollow awareness that I existed on the sidelines. I confided in Ethan repeatedly, especially in our second year. I'd say things like, "Ethan, I feel invisible, like your mother and sisters purposely exclude me," but he'd always shrug. "Harper, you're reading too much into it. Mom's old-fashioned. She just has a certain way of doing things. Just give her time." And so time went by, year after year. But Seraphina never warmed. Lauren never included me in her weekend getaways. Dana never once suggested we meet for coffee despite living only a few miles from me. The 3 of them formed a trio so tight. It was like a chain with unbreakable links. They had their own group texts, their own traditions, their own jokes, and I was never part of any of it. It was around the 3rd year of my marriage that I realized nothing was going to change. We just entered the holiday season. And I was excited because I had spent days trying to perfect Seraphina's famous pumpkin pie recipe. I wanted to wow her with my willingness to learn, maybe earn a little daughter-in-law badge of honor. But when Thanksgiving arrived, I discovered they'd had a family-only lunch at a fancy restaurant the day before, something that was apparently a yearly tradition. "Oh, it's just a quick get-together," Ethan told me offhandedly after I found out about it from a Facebook post. "We do it every year. My mother didn't want to burden you since you were working." My heart sank as I realized that all these years, they had never once thought to invite me, not even after I joined the family. But the final straw, the moment my illusions truly shattered, happened at Christmas dinner during our 6th year of marriage. The dinner was held at Seraphina's sprawling house, a place that looked like a cover spread in a lifestyle magazine. Holiday lights glowed softly from every window. The interior smelled of vanilla, cinnamon, and the underlying tang of expensive red wine. The living room boasted a massive pine tree adorned with shimmering glass ornaments. The mantel was lined with neatly placed stockings that spelled out each family member's name in glittery cursive: Seraphina, Lauren, Dana, Ethan. And an empty space where presumably another stocking might have gone, but there was none for me. Trying to brush it off, I told myself that maybe I'd receive my stocking later, or it was misplaced. But in the pit of my stomach, a knot of dread tightened. We all sat at a grand dining table set with polished silverware, gold-rimmed plates, candlesticks flickering. Conversation flowed about everything from Lauren's recent case victories to Dana's newest upscale clients. About half an hour into the meal, Seraphina clinked her wine glass with a spoon. "All right, everyone, before we get too deep into dessert, I have a little something." From beneath the table, she pulled out a series of medium-sized gift bags, each labeled with a name in her elegant handwriting. "Lauren," she handed one over with a flourish. "Dana." Another bag passed. "Ethan, my dear boy." And then there was a short pause, an icy hush, as I realized there were no more bags in her hands. I caught Seraphina glancing my way, then with a theatrical laugh she said, "Oh, Harper, I'm afraid I didn't get you one this time. Things have been so hectic, you understand." Her tone was so casual it felt like a knife twisted in my chest. I glanced at Ethan, expecting him to speak up, to protest, to say something like, "Mom, how could you forget Harper?" But he stayed quiet, a faint, uncomfortable smile on his lips. Lauren and Dana both let out polite little chuckles. "Mom's been overloaded lately," Lauren said. "Yeah, she's been juggling so many events," Dana added, as if that were an excuse to exclude me from a family Christmas gift exchange. A flush of heat rose in my cheeks, but instead of shrinking back, something in me snapped. A calm, almost eerie clarity took over. I found my voice, and it was surprisingly steady. "That's all right, Seraphina, don't worry, because I didn't forget about you." The entire table went quiet, no one blinked for a moment. You could hear the faint clink of silverware from another room. I pulled out a small wrapped box from my purse, set it gently on the table, and slid it toward Seraphina. "This is for you." She raised an eyebrow. "Harper dear, you shouldn't have." But her tone was wary, not gracious. Lauren and Dana exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan cleared his throat. "What is this, Harp?" he asked, using the nickname he so rarely used these days. I smiled, though my heart was thudding painfully. Seraphina should open it first. With forced politeness, she began unwrapping the silver paper, pulling out what appeared to be a thick sheet of printed documents. Her face tightened as she scanned the first page, then the second. What is this?" she whispered, color draining from her cheeks. I lifted my water glass to my lips, taking a slow sip before responding. "Those are several years' worth of financial documents from your event planning business, including discrepancies in reported revenue and personal expenses filed under company accounts." The hush around the table was suffocating. Lauren grabbed some of the papers, her eyes widening as she read. Dana leaned forward, scanning them from over Lauren's shoulder. "Mom," Lauren said, her voice cracking. "Are these real? You underreported almost $300,000 in revenue over the last few years. And used company money for what? First-class flights, jewelry, salon bills." Dana's face paled. "Mom, why? How could you do this?" Seraphina's hands shook. She tried to form words but couldn't. Ethan stared at me with a look that was a mix of shock, betrayal, and confusion. "You've been digging through her business records?" he asked in a sharp whisper. I turned to face him, my voice calm. "She made me feel invisible for 6 years. I'm an accountant, Ethan. I see numbers more clearly than personal intentions. I saw repeated signs that something was off. Your mother always claimed she had no money to help Lauren with her condo repair, or Dana with her design studio expansion, or even to fix her own roof, yet she continued to live lavishly. Lauren's lips parted. You told me last year you couldn't help with the down payment I needed when my mortgage rate spiked, she whispered to Seraphina. You said times were tough, but you had plenty of money set aside, didn't you? Dana's hands balled into fists. All those times you told me not to rely on you for financial support, to stand on my own 2 feet. It was because you were hiding actual revenue? Seraphina finally found her voice. How dare you bring this up here on Christmas in front of everyone? She snapped, eyes locking on me like daggers. I matched her gaze, not dropping my eyes. You've humiliated me for years in front of this whole family, publicly sometimes, and never shown a shred of remorse. Consider this my gift back to you, a chance for everyone to know the truth. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the hardwood floor, her voice rose in pitch. You're ungrateful, you come into my house, thinking you can sabotage my business. You have no idea what sacrifices I've made, what I've had to do to keep this family afloat. Lauren and Dana both stared at her in disbelief. Family afloat? Dana snapped. We're doing fine, you're the one who's been hoarding money while telling us we're broke. Ethan, pale and silent, looked like he wanted to say something but kept glancing between his mother and me, as if hoping one of us would back down. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, we heard a sudden thump in the hallway, footsteps stumbling and a hoarse cry. Morris! Seraphina gasped. Her husband, the father I'd only heard stories about, was stumbling in from the adjacent room. He'd apparently overheard the entire confrontation. Is this true, Sarah? Have you been hiding money? Lying to me? His voice quivered, and the lines in his face deepened. Morris had always been somewhat of a quiet presence in the household, overshadowed by Seraphina's dominating persona, but he was well-liked, known for his gentle manner. The stories I'd heard painted him as kind, if a bit passive. Answer me, he said, his breath rasping as if he couldn't quite fill his lungs. Seraphina's tough demeanor cracked. Morris, calm down, you weren't supposed to see these papers. She reached out, but he staggered back, pressing a hand to his chest. You told me we were cutting expenses, that the business was just breaking even. We didn't go on vacation this year because you claimed we couldn't afford it, but you could afford to siphon money off the books? He coughed, face contorting in pain. Ethan was the first to move. Dad, take it easy, come sit. But Morris shook his head, sinking to his knees beside a chair. I can't breathe, he murmured. Lauren jumped to call an ambulance. Dana fumbled with her phone. Seraphina crouched beside Morris, tears, real or theatrical, streaming down her cheeks. Oh God, Morris, she cried. Don't do this, calm down, we'll get you to a doctor. In the span of a few minutes, the paramedics arrived, the holiday lights blinking in the windows as the ambulance pulled up outside. They carried Morris away on a stretcher, giving him oxygen, hooking him up to monitors. The rest of us trailed behind in cars, hearts hammering, adrenaline rushing, the Christmas table left behind in disarray. At the hospital, the sterile lights and the smell of antiseptics replaced the warm aroma of spiced apples and roasted turkey. Lauren filled out forms, Dana paced, Seraphina hovered in the waiting area, biting her nails. Ethan pulled me aside, his face drawn. Why? He demanded softly. Why did you have to do it like this on Christmas Day? I looked straight into his eyes. When else was I going to do it? You never believed me when I told you your mother was shutting me out. You never stuck up for me, Ethan, so I did what I had to do. He pressed his hands to his temples. You don't understand, Harper, everything is ruined now. My dad might be in serious trouble because of the stress. Your mother brought this on herself, I replied, anger surging up my throat. And you stood by and let her treat me like nothing for 6 years. You want to make me the bad guy for revealing the truth. But let's not pretend your mother didn't commit fraud. He opened his mouth, then closed it, eyes brimming with conflicting emotions. I never meant for any of this to happen. Maybe I was naive, he mumbled. Not naive, I corrected him. You just didn't care enough to defend me. Then I turned away, walking over to a row of chairs, letting the tension in my shoulders settle into a numb ache. After what seemed like an endless wait, a doctor emerged, telling us Morris was stable but had suffered an acute cardiac episode due to severe stress. He's going to need close monitoring, she explained, and absolutely no more shocks or upsets. Seraphina nodded, tears streaking her mascara. She looked genuinely shaken. A day later, with Morris still in the hospital, the dust began to settle, or at least it seemed that way. I found myself ignoring Ethan's calls. I stayed in a small Airbnb downtown rather than returning to Seraphina's house. Even though that had been the plan for the holiday, I couldn't bear to step foot back into that place. I was done, emotionally drained, physically exhausted. But the repercussions of my unveiling had only just begun, because once the financial documents were out in the open, a series of dominoes fell. An investigation was launched. Rumors spread about Seraphina's event planning business. Important clients pulled out, not wanting to be associated with potential fraud. The IRS got wind of it, and soon enough, Seraphina was in deeper trouble than even I had anticipated. In the weeks that followed, I received minimal communication from Ethan, mostly short, tense texts. "Dad is recovering at home," or "Mom is meeting with lawyers." Eventually, I got one that read, "Harper, we need to talk about us." By then, I'd already spoken to my own lawyer. I'd decided to file for divorce, something I'd been contemplating for well over a year. I realized now that I could no longer tolerate a man who let me stand alone against his family's constant disregard, especially when he never once truly had my back, so I texted Ethan back, "I'm done, I'm filing." The phone calls that followed were furious, tearful, desperate. But I never picked up. I kept it to texts and email, a clean break. During this time, I also learned that Lauren and Dana had confronted their mother about her lies. "You told us you were near bankruptcy," Dana reportedly said. "But you had money in offshore accounts?" Lauren was furious because Seraphina had let her scramble to refinance her condo, pay for expensive repairs. While Seraphina enjoyed hidden luxuries, the sisters felt doubly betrayed, not only by the fraud but by the emotional manipulation. Seraphina had always dangled the promise of help to keep them close, to keep them dependent on her approval. But all that was overshadowed by Morris's fragile state. He was stable, but the scare had aged him, turning his hair whiter, his face graver when he was released. He filed for divorce soon after, apparently. He discovered even more financial misdeeds hidden in the business accounts, and there was no trust left. "I thought I knew my wife," was all he said to Ethan. "Turns out I didn't know a thing." As winter melted into early spring, the family was in shambles. Seraphina faced potential criminal charges. Morris was living alone in a small rental. Lauren and Dana cut off contact with their mother entirely, not even returning her calls, and Ethan had retreated into a stunned silence. The Garrison name was tarnished among their neighbors and community. Every time I saw an article or heard a whisper about them, I felt an odd mixture of vindication and sadness. The carnage was real, but it wasn't only due to me. It was the unveiling of a deeply rooted deception that had been building for years. I moved back into my old apartment in central Philadelphia, a studio I'd kept when I married Ethan but later subleased. Now it was empty again, my furniture dusty, but it felt like freedom. I cleaned it top to bottom, rearranged it to suit the new me, the me who had finally stood up after years of being trodden on. Then, at the start of March, I received a small envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a letter from Lauren. It read, "Harper, I don't know if you'll ever forgive us for how we treated you, but we wanted to say thank you in a strange way. You set us free from a lie we didn't even know we were part of. We never realized how manipulative Mom was. We believed everything she said. I'm not asking for a relationship, but I want you to know I'm sorry." I read it and felt a weight lift off my chest. I wasn't sure I needed an apology, but seeing those words gave me a sense of closure. Lauren also mentioned her father, Morris, was thinking of reaching out to me. Apparently he wanted to apologize for standing by while his wife quietly made me feel unwelcome, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to speak to him. I hadn't spoken much to Ethan either, aside from the legal formalities. In April, Seraphina was formally charged with tax evasion, wire fraud, and falsification of business records. Local news outlets ran the story, small headlines reading, "Prominent event planner indicted." I watched from afar, seeing her court appearance flash on local TV. She wore a neat black suit, the same crisp posture, but her expression was haunted, eyes sunken, no trace of the old superiority. I felt no triumph, just a numb sense that the truth had taken its course. Meanwhile, divorce proceedings between me and Ethan moved steadily forward. We had no children, so custody wasn't an issue. We hadn't bought a house together yet, so there wasn't a major asset battle. We split what we had. I took back some personal items, he kept others. Once in a while he texted me, "I miss you, Harper, can we talk?" But I never responded. I had spent too many years unheard. It was time I protected my peace. Eventually though, a message came from him that was different. "Harp, I started therapy. he wrote. I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I'm working on myself. I see now that I let Mom's approval overshadow everything else. I thought staying neutral was best, but it only hurt you and me. I'm sorry. I read it 3 times, not quite sure what I felt. Sorrow, pity, maybe a tinge of forgiveness, but not enough to go back. Not enough to pretend those 6 years didn't happen. As the air warmed and blossoms appeared on the trees, life felt strangely new. I discovered a routine that soothed me. Waking up at 6 a.m., making coffee, writing in a journal, going to work, returning home, and cooking a simple dinner for myself. No one criticized my cooking techniques or the brand of tomato sauce I preferred. My evenings were quiet, yes, but also peaceful. Sometimes I'd venture out for a walk around the lively Philly streets, soaking in the sense of freedom I once thought was impossible. It was around early May that I decided to do something I'd always wanted. Start a small home-based side business offering freelance accounting services. I had the connections, the skill, and the drive, and I was no longer weighed down by the garrison's judgments. Ironically, the turmoil had unleashed a determination in me to stand on my own 2 feet, unafraid. I was expecting more messages from Ethan, or even from Seraphina's lawyers, but things stayed quiet until mid-June, when I opened my door one morning to find Ethan standing there, the humidity of a summer day curling his hair slightly, his eyes weary. He held a sealed white envelope in one hand. Harper, he said, voice shaking slightly. I'm here to finalize the last parts of the divorce. Can we talk for a minute? Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood awkwardly in my modest living room, glancing around at the modest furniture and fresh flowers I had on the side table. You look good, he murmured. Better, I guess. I shrugged. I feel better, Ethan. Being away from everything has given me space to breathe. I gestured to the envelope in his hand. Is that the paperwork? He nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, I've signed everything. My lawyer has too. You just need to sign the final page and file it. The settlement's all in place. I'm not contesting anything. I nodded, taking the envelope, setting it on the kitchen counter. I'll sign and mail it by tomorrow. He shifted his weight. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, he said softly. But I wanted to say. I see it all now, how Mom treated you, how we let her treat you, how I did nothing. I spent the last few months analyzing every bit of our life. I even rewatched videos of past Christmases, birthdays, and I realized you were always off to the side, always invisible. I can't believe I never stepped in. Pain lanced through my chest, memories of those lonely parties, but I steadied myself. Thank you for saying that, truly, but it doesn't change what happened. He nodded, tears gleaming in his eyes. I know it doesn't. I'm so sorry I didn't do better. I should have protected you. We stood there, the silence slipped eventually. He reached out hesitantly, as if to touch my shoulder. I didn't move away, but I didn't encourage him either. I want you to be happy, Harper, he whispered. You deserve that much. I bowed my head, swallowing a lump in my throat. I want that for myself too, Ethan, I honestly do. He left soon after, and I signed the papers that evening, sending them off first thing in the morning. Once that envelope was out of my hands, a weight lifted. I realized that, for the first time in years, I truly felt free. No more walking on eggshells around Seraphina. No more hearing Ethan defend her or claim I was overreacting. No more wondering if I was crazy for sensing their exclusion. I was done, officially, and irreversibly done. In July, a small local news piece reported that Seraphina had taken a plea deal, admitting guilt to several counts of tax fraud. She had to pay hefty fines and serve probation, but avoided a lengthy prison sentence. Her once thriving business was sold off in chunks, her reputation tarnished. I heard from Lauren that Seraphina was living alone in a small condo, that she had tried repeatedly to contact her daughters, but they refused to engage, at least for now. Morris, meanwhile, had quietly settled into a new life, legally separated, and focusing on his health. For a while I wondered if I should feel guilty, but a close friend reminded me. Harper, all you did was reveal the truth. It's not your fault Seraphina built her house of cards. It's not your fault Ethan never defended you. You walked away with your head high. It was a sentiment I repeated to myself on the days when doubt crept in. Time has a way of weaving healing into everyday life. As August rolled in, I found myself with a growing list of clients for my side business, and my full-time job at the tech startup was going well. One humid Sunday, I took a stroll through my neighborhood, passing by sunlit rows of townhouses, kids playing on sidewalks. I popped into a small cafe, ordered an iced coffee, and sat outside, letting the swirl of city life wash over me. A sense of calm settled. one that I had never truly experienced during my marriage. As September approached, bringing cooler breezes, I decided it was time for a small personal celebration, so I bought myself a new outfit, not because I needed it for a function, but simply because I deserved something nice. I had dinner by myself at a restaurant Ethan once said was too fussy, and I savored every bite afterwards. I took a long walk along the waterfront, gazing at the reflections of the city lights dancing on the water. It was in those reflective moments that I realized, ironically, how some tragedies can pave the way for personal breakthroughs. If Seraphina hadn't pushed me so far, if Ethan had responded differently, I might have stayed, continuing to allow them to walk all over me. But that final cruelty on Christmas, that forgetfulness, had finally snapped my patience, leading me to unleash the damning truth. A truth that not only destroyed the illusions they had carefully curated, but also freed me from a prison I hadn't even realized I was in. By late autumn, the leaves were turning golden, the crisp air signaled the nearing holidays again, but this time I felt none of the old dread. Ironically, I received a letter from Morris, handwritten, in which he apologized for not being the father figure I might have needed, and for enabling Seraphina's harshness. I sensed genuine regret in his words. He mentioned he was living more simply now, that the heartbreak he went through might have given him a second chance to appreciate honesty. I wrote back a short but forgiving note, wishing him well. It felt like a burden off my shoulders, letting go of any bitterness. A couple of weeks before Thanksgiving, I got a call from Lauren. "Harper," she said. "I know it's probably too soon, but Dana and I wanted to invite you for a low-key Thanksgiving dinner at my place. Dad will be there, Mom won't. We've cut contact, but we really want to make amends, or at least try." My chest tightened. I glanced around my living room, at the cozy throw blankets, at the small bookshelf lined with the novels I'd found comfort in. "I appreciate that," I replied softly. "I do, but I'm not sure I can. It's still too fresh, you understand." She sighed, sounding a bit sad. "Yes, of course, but the invitation stands. Even if you want to stop by just for dessert, we'd love to see you." I thanked her, said I'd think about it, and ended the call. The old me might have jumped at a chance to be included, but I realized that my sense of belonging was no longer tied to their acceptance. I was free to choose whether or not I wanted them in my life. In the end, I spent that Thanksgiving with an old friend from college. We cooked together, we laughed, we reminisced. It was relaxed, comforting, and drama-free, something I never truly experienced with the Garrisons. For the first time, I understood what it meant to truly enjoy a holiday without tiptoeing around someone else's moods or judgments. December rolled around again, the city twinkling with lights and holiday music. I found myself thinking about that explosive Christmas from the year before, about how it had marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I had come so far, changed so much, grown in ways I never anticipated. On Christmas Eve, I lit a few candles in my apartment, turned on some soft instrumental carols, and treated myself to a quiet dinner. Ironically, that night I got a text from Ethan. "I know this is random," he wrote, "but I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. I still regret everything, but I hope you're happier now." I typed a long response, then deleted it. Eventually, I sent a brief reply. "Merry Christmas, Ethan. I truly hope you're well." That was it. No more bitterness, no more regrets, just a simple holiday wish. I placed my phone aside, sipped a cup of tea, and felt a gentle wave of peace. Looking back, did I orchestrate a dramatic downfall for Seraphina and her business? Some would say yes, but I see it as revealing a lie that was already corroding the foundations of their family. Truth can be explosive, but it can also set you free. For years, I lived in the shadow of their coldness, struggling alone, losing myself little by little. But that final act of defiance, that Christmas gift of tax documents, was like striking a match in a dark room. Yes, it created chaos. Yes, it burned away illusions. But on the other side of that conflagration, I found my voice, my freedom, my self-respect. A few months later, a new year began, and with it came more possibilities. My freelance work expanded. I eventually left my old tech startup job to focus full-time on my own accounting firm. It grew faster than I expected, thanks to word-of-mouth referrals and the trust clients placed in me. Each step felt like I was rewriting my story, forging a path that wasn't shaped by others' validation. By summer, I leased a slightly bigger apartment, with a tiny balcony, where I placed potted herbs and flowers. There, I'd sometimes sip coffee in the mornings, recalling how far I'd come from that trembling woman who used to stand in Seraphina's kitchen, washing plates while they all laughed behind me. It's funny how life can take you on winding roads. About a year and a half after the meltdown, I reconnected with a friend who introduced me to a colleague named Jacob, a gentle, soft-spoken man who worked in software development. We began talking, then dating, but this time I was cautious. No more illusions that love alone conquers all. No more ignoring red flags or letting myself be minimized. Jacob turned out to be someone who listened, who valued my independence, and who never once asked me to change who I was to fit in with anyone else's expectations. One crisp autumn evening, Jacob and I walked through the park, golden leaves crunching underfoot. He gently asked about my past, about why I was so wary of meeting his family, so I told him in bits and pieces about Seraphina, Ethan, and all those lonely holidays, about how I had finally stood up and the fallout that followed. I worried he might be shocked or put off, but instead he simply held my hand and said, "I'm proud you stood up for yourself, Harper. That's real courage." Tears stung my eyes because I realized then that not everyone would see me as the villain. In time, the garrison story faded from local headlines. Seraphina continued her probation quietly, living in relative isolation. Morris found some measure of peace, traveling with a few friends, reconnecting with old hobbies. Lauren and Dana forgave me for the timing of my revelations, though they had complicated feelings about their mother's fate. They each visited me once or twice, small lunches where we talked about life, not diving too deep into the past, but acknowledging it. We were never going to be best friends, but there was a respectful civility between us, a sense that we had all been changed by the events of that fateful Christmas. And so here I am, telling this story on a calm evening in my own space, the windows open to a soft summer breeze. I'm free, not because I destroyed someone's life, but because I reclaimed my own. The memory of that night at Seraphina's house still sends a shiver through me, but it also reminds me that truth, harsh as it can be, is sometimes the only way to break free from a silent prison. If you're listening to this, perhaps you found yourself trapped in a situation where you feel invisible. Maybe you've been made to believe you're overreacting, or that you should keep the peace at any cost. Let my story serve as a testament. Sometimes, breaking the silence is the only way to truly breathe again. Sometimes you have to risk blowing everything wide open to save yourself. I've learned that real family, real love, doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't let you endure humiliation just to keep a false harmony. Real family, whether by blood or by choice, stands up for each other, cherishes each other, includes each other, no strings attached, no hidden agendas. After everything, you might wonder if I regret what I did. The short answer is, I don't. Would I have chosen a different day if I could go back? Maybe, but the outcome would have been the same. The lie was there, the truth was bound to come out, and I was simply the catalyst. Life goes on, and even in the wreckage, seeds of hope can sprout. I found new friends, new love, a new sense of purpose, and I realized that not all endings are catastrophic. Sometimes they clear the way for something much more genuine and fulfilling. I ended up forging a life where I am no longer the outsider, because I only allow into my life those who genuinely see me, who want me there, who don't place conditions on my belonging. And so, if you're ever in a place where your voice is stifled, where you're enduring quiet cruelties and telling yourself it's not that bad, please remember, you deserve better. You deserve to be heard, to be cherished, to be part of something real, even if it means walking away from those who can't or won't see your worth. That's how I found my happy ending, in the echo of the truth ringing through the halls of a house that never welcomed me, in the steady steps I took to walk away, in the peace and self-respect I discovered waiting on the other side. Because in the end, my final gift to Seraphina wasn't just a stack of incriminating documents. It was the wake-up call that tore down her illusions and freed us all from a life of polite, toxic pretense. And my gift to myself was the courage to leave, to let the pieces fall where they would, knowing that once they settled, I would finally be able to breathe, to live, to love, without begging for scraps of validation. That's my story. It's a story of heartbreak and betrayal, but also of awakening and rebirth. And if there's one thing I hope you carry away from it, it's this. No one has the right to make you feel like an outsider in your own life. Stand up, speak out, and if they don't listen, walk away with your head held high, because your worth does not require anyone's permission, and that, truly, is the happiest ending I could ever have hoped for. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more jaw-dropping tales, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Your support means everything.